South Carolina's beaches are known for sun, sand, and waves, yet beneath the beauty lies a chilling history. At night, the wind carries whispers that no one speaks aloud, footsteps echo along deserted boardwalks, and shadows seem to move across the sand. Some beaches are haunted not by legends alone, but by the tragedies of the past shipwrecks, drownings, and lives lost to storms and secrets. Visitors have reported seeing ghostly figures along the shore, flickering lanterns where no one stands, and the sudden cold of a presence brushing past. Tonight, we will uncover the 20 most haunted beaches in South Carolina, where the tide carries more than shells and driftwood, and where restless spirits walk the sands after dark. If you could hear your name whispered from the crashing waves, would you follow it to the water's edge, or would you run before the shadows reach you? Hello, my dear friend. I hope you are safe tonight, because the beaches we are about to explore are not for the faint of heart. South Carolina is famous for its coastline, but many stretches hide stories that remain untold. Visitors have reported seeing figures walking along empty shores, lights flickering on deserted piers, and fog that rises unexpectedly, carrying the voices of the past. Some witnesses have felt unseen hands tugging at their clothes or hair. Others have glimpsed shadows emerging from the surf or standing on the dunes. Before we take our first step into the haunted sands, consider this. If the ocean called to you with the voices of the dead, would you answer? Or would you retreat to the safety of the shore? Take a deep breath, my friend, and let us step into the 20 most haunted beaches in South Carolina. Folly Beach stretches along the Atlantic coast, a place of golden sand, rolling waves, and the rhythm of tides that has drawn visitors for generations. By day, the beach is alive with laughter, the sound of children playing, and the hum of conversation, umbrellas and beach chairs dotting the sand. The sun reflects off the water in shimmering patterns, and gulls will overhead, calling to one another. Yet as the sun dips below the horizon and the crowds depart, the atmosphere changes. Shadows lengthen across dunes, the wind shifts, and the beach reveals a quieter, more enigmatic character that has been noted by those who linger after dark. Figures are often glimpsed walking along the dunes, moving slowly and deliberately. Attempts to approach or focus on them yield only absence, leaving behind a faint impression of presence and movement. The effect is subtle yet persistent, a suggestion that the beach retains fragments of lives and moments that occurred long before, visible only to those who pause and observe. Visitors report hearing whispers in the wind, delicate and almost musical, carried in gusts that ripple across the sand. The voices are soft, fragmented, and impossible to locate, as if they are both nearby and distant at the same time. Some describe the whispers as repeating phrases from their own thoughts, or echoing conversations that might have occurred decades earlier. The auditory phenomenon is immersive, drawing attention to the subtleties of sound and perception, blending natural ambient noise with an awareness of the beach's lingering history. Soft crying has also been reported, faint and intermittent, often accompanied by a feeling of melancholy that seems to cling to the dunes. It is never aggressive or threatening, yet it leaves a lasting impression, heightening the sense of presence and memory in the environment. Footprints appear in the sand without clear origin, sometimes leading across the dunes or toward the water, only to vanish suddenly. Observers note that these markings never align with the movement of people currently on the beach, reinforcing the impression of unseen activity and the persistence of past moments. The pier becomes a focal point for many reports. At night, a pale woman has been seen standing at its edge, gazing at the waves with stillness and intent. Her features are indistinct from a distance, yet her posture conveys a presence that is undeniable. Approaching the figure results in its disappearance, leaving only the sound of water lapping against pilings and the faint echo of movement in the sand. She appears intermittently, often in conjunction with shifts in fog or wind, blending natural elements with the perception of presence. Her presence is undeniable, yet she remains an enigma, a mystery that haunts the pier. Fog and mist enhance the atmosphere of Folly Beach at night. Dense currents roll in from the water, softening outlines of dunes, piers, and figures, and creating a sense of depth and ambiguity. Light from distant lamps or the moon reflects in muted glimmers on the surface of water and sand, casting shadows that shift subtly with every movement. The interplay of natural illumination, fog, and motion transforms ordinary terrain into a dynamic landscape of perception, where the ordinary becomes charged with possibility and attention is heightened. The soundscape of the beach evolves after dark. Waves break rhythmically against the shore. Gulls call faintly, and wind stirs the sand and vegetation. Against this background, whispers, cries, and other faint sounds appear, blending seamlessly with natural noise. Observers report that these auditory cues are often irregular, appearing when attention is focused or seemingly independent of any visible source. This unpredictability creates a heightened awareness, forcing careful listening and sustained observation. Time seems altered in the quiet hours. Minutes stretch into what feels like longer durations, and movement across the sand becomes deliberate, measured, and conscious. Shadows shift in ways that challenge expectation, and each gust of wind or ripple of fog transforms the landscape subtly. Every step, glance, and sound contributes to the sense of being immersed in a space where past and present coexist, and where the environment retains memory beyond immediate perception. Memory of Folly Beach remains vivid after departure. The glimpsed figures, the whispers, the soft cries, and the vanishing footprints leave impressions that linger in thought and imagination. Even during daylight hours, recollections of movement, sound, and presence influence awareness, creating a subtle resonance that persists beyond physical space. The beach retains these experiences, a testament to the continuity of place, perception, and memory. Folly Beach endures as both natural landscape and repository of experience. Dunes, water, fog, and pier converge with history, observation, and sensory perception, to create an environment that is immersive and reflective. Shadows, sound, and motion interact to provide a narrative without words, allowing visitors to engage fully with space and presence. The beach invites careful attention, sustained awareness, and an openness to experience, leaving a lasting impression of a place where the ordinary and the mysterious coexist, and where the energy of past moments continues to ripple through sand, wind, and waves. Sullivan's Island Beach stretches along the coast, its sands shifting with wind and tide. Carrying the weight of centuries of history. The low dunes rise and fall, dotted with weathered vegetation and the remnants of old fortifications that have long since been abandoned. The ocean laps steadily against the shore, but beneath its calm surface lies a presence that seems to hold memory of those who once defended this land. Even in daylight, the air feels dense with history, and the horizon is heavy with echoes of past events. Visitors to the beach often report a sudden change in atmosphere. A chill presses against skin and clothing, drifting in from the dunes or across the boardwalks. It is subtle, yet unmistakable, as if the air itself carries the memory of lives once lived here. The sound lingers, bouncing between the sand, wood, and stone, creating the impression that movement is occurring just beyond sight. The sound lingers, bouncing between the sand, wood, and stone, creating the impression that movement is occurring just beyond sight. Shadowy figures have been seen pacing near abandoned forts, their forms tall and deliberate. The shapes are human in outline, often appearing in old military uniforms, as if guarding the positions they once manned. Approaching these figures results in nothing tangible, as they vanish or blend into shadows, leaving only a fleeting sense of observation. Their presence is subtle yet persistent, a reminder that the history of Sullivan's Island Beach is not entirely buried in the past. The dunes themselves carry unusual sensations. Cold spots appear unpredictably, brushing against visitors as they traverse the dunes. They are fleeting, yet they leave a lingering awareness that the environment responds to those who move through it. The wind through the dunes carries distant sounds that are difficult to place. Soft echoes of movement, the faint rustle of cloth, and the occasional murmur of voices that rise and fall with the tide. Boardwalks that lead through the dunes amplify every movement. A single step resonates across the planks, echoing faintly as though accompanied by other footsteps. Shadows gather along railings and beneath boards, shifting and stretching with the breeze and the angle of light. Observers describe an almost hypnotic rhythm in these echoes, the sound blending with wind, sand, and water to create a layered sense of presence that is at once haunting and captivating. The abandoned forts retain much of the island's energy. Walls are weathered and crumbling, yet they stand as reminders of the strategic importance this place once held. Corridors and gun emplacements seem to hold memory, carrying the weight of soldiers' footsteps, commands, and long nights spent in vigilance. Shadows stretch through doorways and along stone floors, and glimpses of forms moving within are often reported by visitors who explore these structures. Even the ocean seems to participate in the memory of the place. Light glances across water and sand, creating fleeting forms that appear and vanish. The sound of waves mingles with the wind through the dunes, producing an ambient cadence, carrying a sense of watchfulness and lingering presence. Visitors who remain on the beach for extended periods often notice changes in perception. Time feels slower, distances appear stretched, and awareness of shadows, light, and sound becomes acute. The figures near the forts, the cold spots on the dunes, and the echoes along boardwalks create a sensation that the beach itself is attentive, observing every movement and responding subtly. Every sound, every glance, every step is amplified in the quiet, open spaces. The interplay of light and shadow contributes to the experience. Sunlight, moonlight, and lantern light reflect across sand and stone, creating fleeting shapes and highlights that shift with every moment. Shadows stretch along dunes, boardwalks, and fort walls, forming patterns that seem deliberate, sometimes suggesting figures or movement where none exists. Observers often feel drawn toward these spaces, guided by subtle visual cues, as though the beach itself is influencing attention and movement. Even brief visits leave lasting impressions. The cold brush of unseen air, the fleeting figures in old uniforms, and the layered sounds of wind, sand, and waves remain vivid in memory. Dreams often replicate the dunes, forts, and boardwalks, with shadows and movement continuing to occupy awareness long after leaving. Visitors describe a lingering sense that the past is present, a connection to lives and actions that remain imprinted on the island. Sullivan's Island Beach endures as it has for centuries, a place where history, memory, and subtle energy converge. Its sands, dunes, and abandoned forts carry presence and observation, while shadows and sounds evoke the spirits of soldiers and visitors long gone. To walk its beaches, explore its structures, or follow its boardwalks is to step into a space where the past is alive, where perception is heightened, and where the echoes of human experience persist, watching, guiding, and enduring in the winds and waves of this storied shoreline. Isle of Palms Beach stretches quietly along the coastline, its sand pale and undisturbed, the waves lapping gently against the shore. During the day, the area appears serene, the surf sparkling under sunlight and the smell of salt carried on the wind. Yet after dusk, the atmosphere shifts. Lantern lights flicker along empty streets leading to the beach, glowing briefly before fading as if lit by unseen hands. Visitors stepping onto the sand feel a change in the air, a subtle weight that hints at presence beyond sight. Figures sometimes appear at the edge of the water. They stand silently, gazing out over the waves, their forms human yet faint, almost ethereal. Some observers report the figures waving, an acknowledgement without words, before vanishing into thin air. The moment is brief, but unforgettable, leaving travelers with the impression that the beach is occupied by memories that have not left. Shadows stretch along the shoreline, shifting with the motion of waves and moonlight, reinforcing the sense of life in a place otherwise empty. Whispers drift along the surf, carrying names from decades past. They rise and fall with the rhythm of the waves, close enough to be distinct, yet impossible to trace. Observers describe them as faint, carried just above the roar of the ocean, repeating with subtle variation as if recounting fragments of conversations long forgotten. The effect is immersive, drawing attention to the ambient sound of water while overlaying it with the echo of human presence. The sand itself seems to respond to visitors. Some report the sudden tug of their shoes being pulled into the ground, as though invisible hands anchor them in place. The phenomenon is brief and subtle, yet it creates a heightened awareness of the immediate surroundings. Every step feels measured, as if the earth beneath is aware, holding memory of those who walked before, and shaping perception in response. Lanterns along the streets leading to the beach flicker irregularly. They glow in patterns that appear to follow movement, brightening as visitors approach and dimming when they step away. The effect is hypnotic, creating pathways of light that guide travelers subtly while emphasizing shadows in adjacent corners. Reflections catch on wet sand, tide pools, and glass from distant buildings, enhancing the impression that light and presence are intertwined. Figures move deliberately yet silently along the water's edge, move deliberately yet silently. Observers note their posture, the subtle motion of arms or heads, and the occasional glance toward the beach. They do not speak, yet their actions communicate attention and awareness. When approached, they vanish instantly, leaving no trace beyond footprints that sometimes fade before reaching the sand. Leaving no trace beyond footprints that sometimes fade before reaching the sand. Their presence is fleeting but undeniable, reinforcing the sense that the beach is more than empty space. Reinforcing the sense that the beach is more than empty space. Whispers weave through the sound of surf and wind. Names, phrases, and fragments of speech rise and fall unpredictably. Some echo across long distances along the shore, while others seem confined to small pockets of space near dunes or abandoned boardwalks. Visitors describe the sensation of being addressed, a subtle invitation to listen and notice. Yet the source remains elusive. The combination of sound, water, and presence creates an immersive environment that heightens perception and engages attention fully. The natural features of the beach contribute to the atmosphere. Dunes shift with wind. Tide pools reflect moonlight. And broken boardwalks add shadowed corners where forms can appear and vanish. Waves crash with irregular rhythm. And the low hum of the ocean resonates through the sand and boards. Every element interacts with light, shadow, and perception, creating a layered experience that feels alive with memory. Time seems altered along Isle of Palms Beach at night. Steps feel slower, shadows linger longer, and the rhythm of waves and whispers creates a sense of suspension. Observers report heightened awareness of surroundings, noticing movements that would otherwise go unnoticed, reflections that appear briefly and then vanish, and patterns in light and shadow that seem intentional. Every footstep, glance, and pause carries significance in the quiet and foggy night. Even brief visits leave a lasting impression. Lanterns, figures, whispers, and the subtle tug of sand imprint themselves on memory. Travelers describe returning from the beach with the sensation of being observed. Footsteps replaying in imagination, and the haunting impression of presence that cannot be measured or traced. The experience persists, quiet yet undeniable, leaving the beach alive in thought long after departure. Figures appear, lanterns glow, whispers float across the water, and the sand seems to respond to those who walk its length. Every moment becomes immersive, each step a connection to the lives, echoes, and unseen presences that continue to linger along the shore. At night, Isle of Palms Beach is most alive. Lanterns flicker along empty streets, figures appear briefly at the water's edge. Whispers echo across the surf. And the sand tugs unexpectedly at shoes. Shadows stretch and twist along dunes and tide pools. And the ocean carries fragments of voices and movement. Travelers walk with heightened awareness, feeling the weight of unseen observation and the persistence of memory. The beach exists as a place where history, perception, and presence converge, leaving an indelible impression on all who enter its foggy and illuminated shores. Myrtle Beach stretches along the Atlantic coast, a bustling destination by day, filled with tourists, boardwalks, and the constant rhythm of waves against the sand. Yet at the northern end, as night falls and crowds disperse, the atmosphere changes entirely. The streets empty, the lights dim, and an uncanny silence descends over the dunes and abandoned buildings. The northern stretches feel removed from time, a place where history and memory linger in the shadows. Ghostly silhouettes are often seen walking along the dunes. Figures drift slowly, their outlines faint yet unmistakable against the moonlit sand. They appear to follow the curves of the shoreline, moving with a deliberate pace, as if retracing steps taken decades ago. Observers describe an eerie calm in their presence, a sense that the past is active, quietly persistent in a landscape that seems frozen between night and memory. The abandoned hotels and cottages that line the northern coast add to the atmosphere. Windows are shattered or boarded, facades weathered by storms and salt air, yet at times faint light seems to glow within. Music drifts softly from these structures, the strains of pianos or distant laughter carried across the sand. The sounds are faint, disjointed, and impossible to trace to any living source, yet they evoke a vivid sense of life that once filled these spaces. Cold drafts move across the dunes and pathways even on nights when the air is calm. Travelers report chills brushing their skin, following them as they walk along the beach or near abandoned structures. The sensation is sudden and localized, as though an invisible presence is passing alongside, attentive and aware of each step. The drafts amplify the perception of stillness and isolation, reinforcing the uncanny quality of the northern end. The drafts amplify the perception of stillness and isolation, reinforcing the uncanny quality of the northern end. Footsteps echo softly in the empty streets and along wooden boardwalks. Every sound seems magnified, from the whisper of the wind to the shift of sand beneath shoes. Observers often pause, listening intently, aware that the environment is layered with memory and the faint traces of lives once lived here. Even ordinary noises take on an unusual weight, blending with ghostly visuals and distant music to create an immersive experience. The dunes themselves appear to move subtly with the night. Patterns of shadows shift, and mounds of sand seem to take on shapes that suggest figures in motion. Observers report a sense of being followed, though no living presence is visible. The interplay of moonlight, water, and sand produces fleeting impressions that dissolve when focused on directly, leaving the mind to question what is natural and what is not. Abandoned cottages hold particular significance. Their interiors, though dark and silent, seem to retain echoes of activity. Doors creak as though opened by unseen hands, and occasional rustling comes from the floors or attics. Windows reflect shapes that do not align with reality, revealing glimpses of figures moving inside rooms long emptied of life. Visitors describe a tension between curiosity and unease, drawn to investigate yet wary of what might be encountered. The northern beaches are a study in contrasts. By day, the area is alive with activity and energy. Yet by night, silence and subtle movement dominate. The transition is stark, highlighting the layering of history, memory, and perception. Figures along the dunes, music from empty buildings, and cold drafts coalesce to create a sense of place that is both beautiful and haunting. Time feels altered in these northern stretches. Moments stretch longer than expected, shadows linger. And shadows linger, and the faint music seems to follow travelers along the shore. Observers report repeated glimpses of figures in similar locations, as if the landscape itself preserves routines or patterns from past lives. The combination of visual, auditory, and tactile stimuli produces a deep sense of immersion, making the environment feel alive despite the absence of ordinary life. Even in moments of stillness, the environment exerts influence. The waves provide a rhythmic backdrop that amplifies other sensations: the shuffle of sand, the distant echo of footsteps, the soft flicker of light through broken windows. The northern end feels both expansive and intimate. A space where attention is drawn to details that might otherwise be overlooked. And where the ordinary is transformed into something uncanny. Visitors often leave with a lasting impression of duality. The northern stretches of Myrtle Beach are at once serene and unsettling. Beautiful in their natural forms yet alive with traces of the past. Figures along the dunes, the faint music, and the cold drafts create an immersive narrative of presence and memory. Each observer carries the sensation of being part of a layered history, where the past continues to exist alongside the present. Myrtle Beach North End endures as a place where environment, memory, and perception converge. The ghostly silhouettes, faint music from abandoned structures, shadows, and subtle movement of sand and air create an atmosphere that is immersive and unforgettable. Visitors experience not only the physical space of the beach but also the lingering presence of lives once lived, a quiet reminder that even in the absence of crowds, the northern stretches remain alive with history, memory, and the unseen. Hunting Island Beach stretches along the coast, its sands wide and windswept, the waves rolling steadily toward the shore. The lighthouse stands tall, a sentinel of white and red, guiding ships across the waters. By day, the area is serene, with gulls calling overhead and the breeze carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. Yet beneath the calm surface lies a history marked by tragedy, a presence that becomes palpable as the sun sinks and the evening shadows stretch across the beach. Figures are often seen near the lighthouse tower, their forms faint yet distinct against the fading light. Some stand at the base, gazing out to sea, motionless as if waiting or watching. Others glide silently along the shoreline, their movements smooth, almost imperceptible, blending with the rhythm of the waves. Observers often pause, struck by the sight of shapes that seem human but impossible to approach, vanishing when attention focuses too closely. The lighthouse and its surroundings feel alive, carrying memory in every shadow, every stone, and every crest of surf. Distant screams drift across the beach, carried on the wind. The sounds are faint but persistent, weaving into the natural noises of the sea and wind, creating a tension that is immersive and compelling. Observers report an instinctive awareness, a heightened attention to each detail of the environment, from the texture of the sand to the movement of light on the water. The lighthouse itself enhances the atmosphere. Its structure rises above the dunes, casting long shadows across the beach. Light from the lantern room reflects on the wet sand and nearby rocks, creating patterns that shift with the movement of clouds and waves. Figures sometimes appear within these reflections, standing at angles that defy expectation, glimpsed only in moments when illumination aligns with perspective. Their presence reinforces the feeling that the site remembers and engages with those who enter. Footprints appear in the sand, solitary or in pairs, following paths that do not correspond to living observers. The pattern of movement suggests memory preserved in the environment, a record of lives and moments that continue to interact with the present. Observers often notice the impressions while walking, feeling both drawn to follow and cautious of the unknown. The pattern of movement suggests memory preserved in the environment, a record of lives and moments that continue to interact with the present. Even in stillness, Hunting Island Beach communicates. Where perception must be careful and observant, and where each step carries the weight of awareness. The shoreline curves gently, leading toward rocky outcrops and the cliffs that shelter the lighthouse. Figures appear intermittently along this terrain, standing atop rocks or moving along pathways that have been long abandoned. Observers report that these forms often align with points of historic accidents, moments where the waves or cliffs claimed lives. The presence is quiet, reflective, and insistent, drawing attention to the interplay of memory, geography, and perception across the landscape. As night falls, the glow from the lighthouse sweeps across the beach, illuminating dunes and distant waves. Figures become more distinct in contrast with the moving light, their forms fleeting yet undeniable. Footsteps and distant voices continue, layered over the natural soundscape, sustaining the impression of a living memory embedded in the site. Visitors often feel a profound awareness of those who passed before, the countless travelers, sailors, and wanderers whose journeys ended here. The beach, the lighthouse, and the dunes become vessels of presence, preserving fragments of movement, attention, and loss. Observers sense the continuity of time, a layering of past and present that heightens awareness and engagement with the environment. Each moment of observation reinforces the sense that the site is alive with memory, subtly interacting with those who enter its space. Departing Hunting Island Beach leaves a lasting impression. The lighthouse recedes in distance. Figures vanish. Footsteps fade. Yet the memory of presence remains vivid. Observers carry with them the sounds, shadows, and subtle sensations of a site where tragedy, memory, and perception converge. The beach, the lighthouse, and the surrounding environment persist in recollection, reminding those who leave that the place is alive with echoes, silently observing, remembering, and enduring. Across the passage of time, the memory of presence remains vivid. Observers carry with them the sounds, shadows, and subtle sensations of a site where tragedy, memory, and perception converge. The beach, the lighthouse, and the surrounding environment persist in recollection, reminding those who leave that the place is alive with echoes. Silently observing, remembering, and enduring across the passage of time, the memory of presence remains vivid. Ultimately, Hunting Island Beach is more than sand, sea, and rock. It is an environment where memory, perception, and presence intertwine. Figures gliding along the shoreline, distant footsteps, and flickers of light create an immersive, layered experience. Every visit becomes an exploration of awareness, history, and attention, leaving a lasting impression of a beach haunted not by menace, but by the enduring presence of lives, stories, and memories that continue to resonate long after the waves have receded. By day, the beach is serene, a natural haven where water meets land in constant motion, gulls will overhead, and sunlight sparkles on the surface of the tide. Yet beneath this beauty lies a haunting presence, subtle but persistent, a memory carried on the wind and in the folds of landscape. Figures are sometimes glimpsed walking along the dunes, their forms partially obscured by moonlight or the soft haze of fog that drifts in from the ocean. Their movements are slow and deliberate, and vanish when approached, leaving behind only faint impressions in the sand or the sense of having been watched. Observers describe the sensation as neither threatening nor comforting, but deeply evocative, as if the land itself holds fragments of lives and moments from long ago. The dunes seem to shape and guide perception, blending natural contours with the ephemeral presence of these figures. Lantern lights appear in places where no electricity exists, small glows that hover between marsh and sand, along the edges of dunes, or near abandoned structures. Their illumination is subtle yet distinct, casting flickering patterns across grass, sand, and water. The lights do not behave consistently, they shift, disappear, and reappear in ways that defy explanation, creating a visual rhythm that draws attention and heightens awareness. These lanterns seem tethered to the landscape itself, marking the presence of something unseen yet perceptible. Whispers drift across the beach from the thick marshes inland. Carried on the breeze. They are faint at first, indistinct, but gradually become clear enough to resemble names or fragments of sentences. Listeners report hearing voices that echo memories or moments that never occurred in their own experience. A layering of perception and suggestion that evokes curiosity and unease. The marshes act as both conduit and veil, filtering sound and amplifying resonance, allowing the beach to become a space where memory and imagination intersect. The shoreline itself is alive with subtle movement. Waves break rhythmically, shifting sand and creating new patterns with each tide. Driftwood and shells are scattered along the edges, moved by water, wind, and unseen forces. Footprints appear and fade along the wet sand, sometimes aligning with glimpsed figures, sometimes leaving no visible source. The interplay between natural processes and perception reinforces the sense of a space where past and present overlap, where the environment holds memory in both visible and invisible forms. Dunes and grasses create shifting corridors of shadow and light. Sunlight during the day casts long lines across the sand, emphasizing the curves and folds of the landscape. At night, moonlight and starlight produce soft illumination, transforming familiar shapes into ambiguous forms that encourage observation and reflection. Shadows bend and stretch with every movement of the wind, appearing as figures or traces of activity that vanish when attended to directly. The environment encourages mindfulness, compelling visitors to observe carefully and move deliberately. Sounds shape the experience of Kiowa Island Beach. The wind threads through dune grass, water laps gently against sand, and distant gulls call faintly across marsh and shore. Layered within these natural sounds are the whispers, footsteps, and occasional soft glow of lanterns. Silence is never complete, it is filled with the potential for perception, for noticing subtle changes that suggest presence. Every sound, motion, or shift in temperature becomes amplified, creating a continuous dialogue between observer and environment. Temperature changes subtly along the beach. Cool gusts follow movement, brushing against skin with no visible source, sometimes coinciding with shifts in light or the appearance of figures. The effect is transient yet noticeable, heightening awareness and reinforcing the impression that unseen forces inhabit the landscape. Observers report a mix of curiosity and tension, a heightened sensitivity to their surroundings, and a sense of being both welcomed and observed by the place itself. Time behaves differently in the quiet hours. Minutes stretch when attention is focused on shadows, sounds, and movement, while hours can pass unnoticed when immersed in observation. The rhythm of waves, wind, and rustling grasses merges with the imperceptible motion of figures and lanterns, creating a layered experience where past and present coexist. Each step, glance, and sound becomes part of a continuous narrative, weaving together natural phenomena and subtle impressions of presence. Memory of Kiowa Island Beach lingers long after leaving. The glimpsed figures, the flickering lanterns, and the whispers from the marsh, and the shifting sand remain vivid in recollection. Visitors carry the impressions forward, integrating the subtle movements, sounds, and sensations into ongoing awareness of space and atmosphere elsewhere. The beach leaves an enduring mark, a place where beauty and haunting coexist, where the natural world intersects with the echoes of history and presence, and where each visitor becomes part of a layered, living narrative. Kiowa Island Beach endures as both a natural sanctuary and a repository of memory. The dunes, marshes, shoreline, and tidal waters interact with shadows, light, sound, and presence to create an immersive environment. Figures, lanterns, whispers, and movement converge to form a space where attention, observation, and reflection are rewarded with understanding of place and atmosphere. The beach invites careful engagement, leaving visitors with a lasting impression of a location alive with history, perception, and the quiet persistence of the unseen, a space where the ordinary and the mysterious coexist harmoniously. Capers Island Beach lies isolated, reachable only by boat, its sand stretching wide and untouched, kissed by tides that leave patterns in the moonlight. The shoreline is framed by low dunes that shift with wind and water, their edges casting long, twisting shadows across the beach. The air carries the scent of salt, seaweed, and the damp tang of sand, thickened at night by a chill that seems to press against the skin. The beach feels suspended in time, a place where the ordinary world fades behind the fog of memory and presence. As evening falls, the island grows quiet yet charged, every sound amplified in the still air. Waves lap against the shore with a steady rhythm, and the distant call of seabirds drifts faintly across the water. Shadows stretch along the dunes, moving in ways that seem deliberate. Travelers often report a sense of being watched, an awareness that eyes linger from the darkness beyond vision. The effect is subtle yet persistent, drawing attention to corners and hollows of sand where nothing appears to move. Figures occasionally appear along the waterline. They are ghostly, their outlines blurred and shimmering in the moonlight. Some stand still for long moments, gazing silently across the waves, while others move slowly, as if retracing steps taken long ago. Approaching these figures causes them to vanish, leaving behind a lingering impression of presence. Their silent observation reinforces the sense that Capers Island Beach carries echoes of lives once lived and remembered. Distant sounds are common here. Travelers report hearing drumming or gunfire, carried across the water and dunes. The noises are irregular, sometimes faint and intermittent, other times sharp and echoing. They seem tied to no living source, yet they carry the weight of memory, like remnants of conflicts long ended. The cadence of drums or the distant crack of weapons resonates against sand and stone, amplifying the sensation that history lingers in every shadow and contour of the beach. The dunes themselves are alive with movement. Shadows slip along the slopes, sometimes pooling in depressions or along ridges. Shapes appear in the periphery, stretching and shifting in response to light and wind. Visitors often describe a sense of rhythm in these motions, subtle and deliberate, as if the landscape itself observes and interacts with all who traverse it. The interplay of shadow, sand, and moonlight transforms the ordinary dunes into spaces that feel charged and aware. Boarding the beach by boat reinforces the feeling of isolation. The sound of water against the hull, the creak of oars, and the distant calls of nocturnal birds amplify the anticipation of arrival. The shoreline expands outward, empty and silent, and the transition from water to sand marks entry into a place that exists outside the normal flow of time. Every footstep is deliberate, echoing across the sand, mingling with the residual energy of shadowy forms and the memory of sounds from battles long past. The interplay of light and darkness creates constant awareness. Moonlight glances off water and sand, illuminating portions of the beach while leaving other areas shrouded in shadow. Figures appear along the dunes or near the water, often caught in brief illumination before vanishing as quickly as they appeared. The light and shadow amplify perception, making every movement, every whisper of wind, and every ripple of water feel significant. Even the ocean contributes to the atmosphere. Waves reflect moonlight in fragmented patterns, creating illusions of movement across the shore. Ripples shift with the tide, forming shapes that mimic figures or footsteps. The water itself seems to carry memory, echoing distant sounds of drums, guns, and human presence. Travelers report that the rhythm of waves and wind blends with shadows on the sand, producing a sensation of immersive awareness, as though the beach itself is alive and attentive. Visitors often describe a heightened sensitivity to sound and movement. Steps on sand echo long distances. Every whisper of wind carries subtle tones. And shadows appear to shift in coordination with attention. The figures along the waterline. The movements of the dunes. and the distant echoes of drums and gunfire combine to create a layered perception of presence that is difficult to explain yet impossible to ignore. Time seems altered, moments stretching as the mind and senses adjust to the charged environment. Even brief stays leave lasting impressions. The cold brush of wind across the shoulders. The silent observation of ghostly figures. And the distant sounds of battle linger in memory long after leaving the island. Dreams often replay the dunes, shoreline, and shadows, reinforcing the sense that Capers Island Beach is more than a landscape. It is a space where history, memory, and subtle energy converge. Where presence continues to occupy space, even when no living being is there. Capers Island Beach endures as it has for decades, shaped by tides, sand, and wind, yet inhabited by echoes of the past. Its dunes, shoreline, and water carry memory and awareness. Figures appear, shadows shift, distant drumming and gunfire echo. And the beach observes silently. To walk its sands is to enter a world where the past is alive. Where perception is heightened. And where the memory of those who once stood on the shore lingers. In every shifting shadow. And every ripple of water. The beach observes silently. Edisto Beach stretches quietly along the coastline, its sand pale and smooth, the surf moving rhythmically against the shore. By day, the beach appears calm and serene, the waves sparkling in sunlight and gulls calling above the dunes. By night, however, the atmosphere shifts. Visitors often report sudden cold spots that seem to follow them as they walk along the sand. The chill is sharp and concentrated, brushing skin and carrying the sensation of being watched, as if unseen eyes track every step. Figures sometimes appear near abandoned cottages along the beach. Their clothing is old-fashioned, faded and worn, suggesting eras long past. They move slowly along porches or between sand dunes, pausing to glance toward the water. When approached, the figures vanish, leaving only empty cottages and the gentle rush of the tide. Observers describe the moments as brief yet vivid, the presence undeniable, creating the impression that memory itself has taken form along the shoreline. Soft whispers and laughter drift over the waves. They rise and fall unpredictably, sometimes close to the dunes, other times carried across the surf. Words are faint and indistinct, fragments of conversations lost to time, yet they give the sense of life that once filled the cottages and boardwalks. Travelers pause to listen, hearts quickening as the sound weaves between the crash of waves and the call of distant birds, blending natural and supernatural elements into a single, immersive experience. Pale faces sometimes emerge in the surf. Observers describe them as faint and human, appearing briefly among the whitecaps, before vanishing as quickly as they appear. The effect is heightened by the movement of waves, the reflection of moonlight, and the subtle, cold pull of the tide beneath bare feet. The effect is heightened by the movement of waves, the reflection of moonlight, and the subtle, cold pull of the tide beneath bare feet. The presence is disconcerting, leaving a lingering impression that something watches from the water. The atmosphere is heightened by the movement of waves, the reflection of moonlight, and the subtle, cold pull of the tide beneath bare feet. The cottages themselves enhance the atmosphere. Wooden structures lean and weather with age, windows are darkened, and shutters creak in the wind. Shadows gather in corners and porches, creating spaces where forms can appear and disappear unexpectedly. The interplay of light, shadow, and movement gives the impression of life embedded in the structures, a quiet echo of the past preserved in timber and sand. Fog sometimes rolls in from the water, curling over dunes and drifting along the beach. Shadows shift within the mist, figures appear and vanish, and the chill becomes more pronounced. Travelers report that visibility diminishes suddenly, making familiar paths feel altered, while the sensation of being observed intensifies with every step. Footsteps echo along the sand and boardwalks, sometimes mirroring those of visitors, sometimes appearing independently. The sound is subtle, blending with waves and wind, yet perceptible enough to create the impression of an unseen presence. Each creak of timber, each crunch of sand beneath shoes, seems amplified by history, suggesting movement in the dunes, cottages, and along the surf where no one is visible. Time feels altered along Edisto Beach at night. Moments stretch longer, shadows linger, and sounds of water and whispers seem to move in rhythm with perception rather than reality. Figures appear and vanish in a fluid pattern, pale faces emerge in the surf, and lanterns or moonlight flicker across the cottages. Visitors describe heightened awareness, noticing details of the beach, the cottages, and the dunes that they might have overlooked in daylight. Even brief encounters leave lasting impressions. The sudden cold, the figures, the whispers, and the ephemeral faces imprint themselves on memory. Travelers recount walking along the sand with the sense that unseen presences follow, watching and observing, leaving a subtle weight that persists after leaving the beach. The echoes of sound, movement, and coldness continue to resonate, creating an enduring sensation of history and presence. The natural elements of Edisto Beach enhance the experience. Waves move in constant rhythm, reflecting moonlight across sand and water. Dunes shift subtly in wind, creating shadowed hollows where forms can appear. Cottages tilt with age, their surfaces reflecting faint illumination, drawing attention to movements that might otherwise go unnoticed. Even the air itself seems to hold memory, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed alongside faint impressions of human presence. Edisto Beach exists as a space where past and present overlap. Figures appear, whispers drift across the surf, cold spots brush skin, and pale faces emerge and vanish. The cottages, dunes, and waves all contribute to a layered environment, blending history, perception, and memory into a continuous experience. Travelers feel observed, their senses heightened, and the ordinary act of walking along the shoreline becomes immersive, charged with subtle, persistent awareness. The ordinary act of walking along the shoreline becomes immersive, charged with subtle, persistent awareness. At night, Edisto Beach is most alive. Figures linger near cottages and along the water. Whispers drift across waves. Cold spots follow steps. Pale faces emerge in the surf before vanishing. Lanterns flicker and shadows stretch along sand and dunes. Footsteps echo unexpectedly, blending with the rhythm of waves and wind. Visitors leave with impressions that persist. A quiet sense of observation, memory, and presence woven into the landscape. Edisto Beach remains a place where history, perception, and the unseen converge. Leaving an indelible mark on those who walk its sand and witness its fleeting, haunting forms. Folly's Island beach stretches for miles along the Atlantic coast, a long, quiet expanse of sand that holds both beauty and a dark history. By day, the waves crash gently against the shore, gulls cry overhead, and the sunlight sparkles across the water. Yet as evening approaches and the tourists leave, the northern stretches of the beach transform into a landscape that is still, eerie, and full of whispers from the past. Figures are sometimes seen walking through the dunes. Their movements are deliberate, moving against the wind as if guided by unseen intent. Observers report that the figures do not interact but maintain a persistent presence, moving steadily even as the wind shifts and the tide pulls at the edges of the shore. Crying can be heard on quiet nights, soft and plaintive, carried by the breeze from unknown origins. The sound is rarely sustained, rising and falling in unpredictable patterns. Mixes with the faint hum of the ocean and the rustling of grasses along the dunes, creating an auditory landscape that is at once haunting and immersive. Some visitors swear that the cries echo past events, voices reaching out across time, blending with the natural environment to create a sense of lingering memory. Faint piano music drifts across the sand from nowhere. The notes are soft, melancholic, and irregular, suggesting a melody played in solitude or in remembrance. The sound seems to shift with each step, drawing attention to abandoned cottages and remnants of old boardwalks. Even when the origin cannot be located, the music evokes a presence, filling the night air with an echo of lives once lived along the beach. Footsteps are often reported following visitors along the boardwalk. The sound is measured and deliberate, sometimes matching the pace of the observer, at other times slightly behind or ahead. When glances are cast toward the source, nothing is seen. The auditory sensation is precise and clear, leaving a lasting impression that something or something is sharing the journey across the sand and wooden planks. The dunes themselves seem to hold memory. Patterns of wind-blown sand shift subtly, leaving traces of movement that vanish quickly. Shadows stretch and fold over hills and depressions, sometimes resembling shapes that are human or animal. Observers report a sense of being watched, an awareness that the environment is attentive and responsive to motion. The interplay of sand, wind, and light produces fleeting visual phenomena that linger in perception even after being dismissed. Abandoned cottages and remnants of old hotels contribute to the atmosphere. Windows are broken or boarded, porches sag, and the walls bear the marks of years of exposure to sun, rain, and storms. Faint reflections, flickers of light, and shadowed corners create an impression of life where none exists. Objects inside appear displaced from time to time, as if the memory of occupants persists subtly within the structures. The beach itself amplifies every sound. Waves crash more loudly in certain areas, wind whistles through dunes and vegetation, and the soft rustle of sea oats carries in unpredictable directions. Ordinary movements of footsteps, shifting boards, or a dropped item are reflected and magnified, heightening perception and contributing to a sense of heightened awareness. Visitors often describe the environment as alive, responsive, and attentive, even when no one else is present. Visitors often describe the environment as alive, responsive, and attentive, even when no one else is present. Visitors often describe the environment as alive, responsive, and attentive, even when no one else is present. Time seems altered along Folly Beach at night. Minutes stretch, shadows linger longer than expected, and the cries and music appear in irregular yet repeating patterns. Observers describe the sensation of entering a separate space, where ordinary perception is suspended and the environment asserts its presence. The movement of figures, the drifting melodies, and the sound of footsteps combine into an immersive experience that feels layered with history and memory. Even in moonlight, the beach exudes an uncanny quality. Sand and water take on a muted glow. Shadows stretch along dunes. Remnants of structures. The faint outline of figures becomes more pronounced. Against reflective surfaces. The interplay of light and darkness reinforces the impression that the beach is not entirely inert. That memory and presence inhabit both natural and constructed spaces. Visitors often leave with lasting impressions of atmosphere and presence. The ghostly figures in the dunes. The cries and piano music. The footsteps along the boardwalk. And the subtle responsiveness of the environment. Leaving a profound sense of connection to the history embedded in the sand and structures. Folly Beach endures as a place where landscape, memory, and perception converge. Its dunes, abandoned structures, sounds, and shadowed figures create an environment that is mysterious, immersive, and unforgettable. Visitors encounter not only the physical beauty of the shore but also the intangible presence of lives and events long past, making the northern stretches a space where the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary, and the unseen continues to exist alongside the living. Seabrook Island Beach stretches quietly along the coast, its sands wide and pale beneath the soft light of dawn. The waves roll steadily, breaking gently on the shore, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. Early morning fog drifts across the dunes, curling in on itself and blurring the boundary between sand and sky. In this quiet, ethereal setting, subtle signs of presence emerge, drawing attention to the history and memory embedded in the landscape. Ghostly lights appear on the sand, flickering with an irregular rhythm as though carried by unseen hands. They glow faintly, casting soft illumination across footprints, shells, and driftwood. Observers report that the lights move slowly, rising and falling in brightness, appearing closer or farther without warning. The effect is mesmerizing, a delicate interplay between visibility and shadow, creating the impression of life in a place that is otherwise empty. Figures glide along the dunes, their forms almost transparent in the early morning fog. They move silently, following the contours of the sand, pausing at ridges or near clumps of beach grass. Some stand still, looking out toward the horizon, while others drift slowly past, dissolving into the mist. Visitors often feel a sense of connection with these shapes, a quiet awareness that the space is observed and remembered, as though the beach preserves fragments of lives long gone. The water itself carries subtle echoes. Names are called softly, drifting across the waves, indistinct yet recognizable. Observers report the sensation of the voice coming from the water, near or distant, sometimes overlapping with the natural rhythm of surf and wind. The experience is fleeting, drawing attention without fear, heightening perception and creating a delicate balance between curiosity and caution. Each sound becomes a guide, connecting those present with the invisible layers of memory in the environment. Footsteps are sometimes felt rather than heard. A brushing touch along the shoulder, a subtle pressure against the back, a fleeting sense of presence nearby. These sensations occur when visitors are alone, reinforcing awareness of the space as alive with attention. Every step through the sand is taken with heightened focus, every glance cast toward the dunes measured and deliberate. The fog amplifies the atmosphere, diffusing light from the sky and the ghostly illumination on the sand. Shadows stretch and bend unpredictably, giving depth to the dunes and creating pockets where figures appear and disappear. Patterns of light and shade make ordinary features unfamiliar, emphasizing the ethereal quality of the space. Observers find themselves attentive to each subtle movement, aware of the interplay between fog, light, and unseen presences. The dunes themselves hold memory. Footprints appear and vanish, shallow depressions shift. Shallow depressions shift as if the sand has been moved by invisible weight. Driftwood and shells are subtly displaced. Driftwood and shells are subtly displaced, drawing attention to the interaction of natural and unseen forces. The beach becomes a living record, preserving traces of movement and attention over time. Each observation is layered, blending perception of the physical environment with the impression of ongoing presence. Blending perception of the physical environment with the impression of ongoing presence. Sounds carry differently across the sand. The whisper of wind through grass. The crash of distant surf. And the soft echoes of voices. Blend to create a complex sensory environment. The auditory landscape enhances perception, making shadows and lights more compelling, footprints more significant. And the figures in fog more vivid. Observers often feel drawn into a rhythm. Moving with awareness that every sound may indicate presence. Time behaves subtly differently here. Moments stretch and contract. The fog shifting at irregular pace. Lights flickering in ways that defy expectation. Observers often feel suspended. Attuned to every detail of movement, shadow, and sound. The combination of fog, light, sound, and subtle touch creates a deeply immersive experience. Compelling full engagement with the beach and its invisible inhabitants. Departing Seabrook Island Beach leaves a lasting impression. Ghostly lights, figures gliding through fog, soft voices across the water. And fleeting touches linger in memory. The space remains vivid, a reminder that some places preserve memory and attention. Interacting with those who visit long after they have left. The beach holds presence even in emptiness. A reminder that some places preserve memory and attention. Observers carry with them the sensory richness of the environment, the heightened perception, and the quiet awareness that the beach holds presence even in emptiness. Ultimately, Seabrook Island Beach is more than sand and water. It is an environment where memory, perception, and presence converge. Ghostly lights, figures in fog, echoed voices, and subtle touches create a layered, immersive experience. Each visit becomes an exploration of attention, awareness, and connection to history embedded in place. The beach endures, silently observing, preserving, and engaging all who walk along its dunes, leaving an unforgettable impression of a space that is both natural and profoundly alive. Eatingsville Beach lies quietly along the coast, a town once vibrant with life now slowly reclaimed by sand, marsh, and the relentless advance of tides. The cottages stand weathered and hollowed, roofs caved in and windows shattered, their frames leaning against the push of wind and water. The landscape is both beautiful and eerie, with marsh grasses swaying in the breeze, tidal pools reflecting the sky, and the constant rhythm of waves moving in and out, carrying whispers from the past. Figures are sometimes glimpsed among the ruined cottages and along the piers. They appear faint and human-like, moving slowly as though performing tasks long forgotten, only to vanish when approached. The motion is deliberate yet elusive, a presence that hints at memory lingering in the very structures themselves. Observers describe a sensation of being watched, a subtle awareness of activity that seems impossible given the emptiness of the town, heightening attention and engagement with the environment. Whispers drift through the air, carried on the wind and mingling with the sound of surf. They are soft and fragmented, sometimes repeating words or phrases that suggest dialogue from lives long gone. The voices are fleeting, appearing from between cottages, through alleys of sand, and across broken piers. They are never threatening, yet they leave an indelible impression, weaving a connection between visitor and memory, past and present. Each whisper draws attention to the smallest details of the environment, creating a sense of continuous presence. The surf itself contributes to the haunting atmosphere. Waves crash rhythmically against pilings, echoing across sand and water, in tones that suggest lamentation or sorrow. The sound carries across the beach, blending with wind and marsh, creating an immersive auditory landscape. On quiet nights, the surf seems to amplify the echoes of the town's history, transforming ordinary coastal sounds into something layered, emotional, and resonant with memory. Buildings reveal subtle signs of past life. Doorways are twisted, floors sag, and furniture or remnants of decoration lie scattered, partially buried in sand. Doorways are twisted, floors sag, and furniture or remnants of decoration lie scattered, partially buried in sand. Doorways are twisted, floors sag, and furniture or remnants of decoration lie scattered, partially buried in sand. Walls are weathered, peeling paint exposing wood that has endured decades of storms. Each detail reinforces the sense that the town retains its history, preserving traces of routine, labor, and leisure long after human presence has faded. Visitors moving through the space experience both the tangible reality of decay and the intangible sense of memory embedded in structure and landscape. Visitors moving through the space experience both the tangible reality of decay and the intangible sense of memory embedded in structure and landscape. Visitors moving through the space experience both the tangible reality of decay and the intangible sense of memory embedded in structure and landscape. Light and shadow play across the ruins, particularly at dawn and dusk. Sunlight reflects off tidal pools and broken glass, casting glimmers across sand and interior spaces. Shadows from dunes, buildings, and marsh grass stretch and shift with the movement of the sun and the sway of wind, creating dynamic shapes that can suggest movement where none exists. Observers often pause, uncertain if what they see is form or imagination, perception or memory, reinforcing the immersive and uncanny quality of the space. reinforcing the immersive and uncanny quality of the space. The marshes behind the town amplify both sound and perception. Rustling reeds carry distant noises, footsteps, and whispers across the sand. Mist rising from wetland pools softens the edges of buildings and dunes. Light refracts through haze and moisture, creating the impression of figures or movement just beyond sight. The marshes, ever-shifting and mutable, transform familiar terrain into a space that feels alive with memory and subtle motion. Transform familiar terrain into a space that feels alive with memory and subtle motion. Temperature and air movement are notable within the ruins. Sudden gusts of wind brush past corners or across dunes, seemingly without source, enhancing the perception of presence. The air often feels heavy or charged in specific areas, particularly near remnants of cottages or along the piers. These subtle physical cues combine with sight and sound to create a multisensory experience, reinforcing the sense that the town, while abandoned, remains active in memory and energy. Time itself seems altered when visiting Eatingsville Beach. Minutes expand during careful observation of shadow, sound, and movement. While hours can pass unnoticed amid the immersive interplay of light, fog, and environmental cues. The rhythm of surf, wind, and shifting shadows provides a continuous framework that blends past and present, heightening awareness and encouraging deliberate exploration. Visitors find themselves attuned to detail, perception sharpened by the nuances of environment and memory. Memory of the town lingers long after departure. Figures glimpsed among ruins. Whispers in the wind. Shifting shadows. Echoes of surf. Observers carry the impressions forward, integrating the sensory and emotional resonance into awareness of space elsewhere. Eatingsville Beach leaves an enduring imprint. A place where the ordinary merges with the extraordinary. Where decay is intertwined with memory. And where the presence of what once was continues to ripple through sand, marsh, and tide. Eatingsville Beach endures as both landscape and repository of human experience. Its cottages, piers, dunes, and marshes interact with shadows, sound, and light to create an immersive narrative. Figures, whispers, and the rhythm of surf converge to offer perception, attention, and reflection. Visitors are invited to experience the space as both physical and atmospheric, a place where history, memory, and environment converge. Leaving a lasting impression of beauty, melancholy, and the quiet persistence of presence long after the beach is left behind. A place where history, memory, and environment converge, leaving a lasting impression of beauty, melancholy, and the quiet persistence of presence long after the beach is left behind. Deweese Island Beach rests at the edge of the sea, accessible only by boat. A place where isolation meets the rhythm of tides. The shoreline stretches wide, bordered by low dunes and thick marshland. And the air carries the scent of salt, sand, and the faint tang of seaweed. At night, the beach takes on a different character, one cloaked in shadow and mystery. Where every sound and movement is amplified, and every shape in the fog feels alive with intent. Figures are sometimes seen standing at the edge of the surf, their outlines blurred in the moonlight or mist. They move slowly, deliberately, and occasionally step into the water, only to vanish into its reflective surface. Approaching them reveals nothing tangible, leaving a lingering sense of observation, as if the beach itself preserves memory and presence. Their movements are subtle yet unmistakable, creating an atmosphere charged with awareness and tension. Abandoned shacks dot the dunes and lowlands of the island. Lanterns flicker within, casting warm but uneven light through cracked windows and broken walls. The glow illuminates nearby sand and debris in shifting patterns, revealing textures and forms that vanish as soon as the eyes adjust. Observers often feel drawn toward these lights, curious about the source, only to find empty spaces or shadows where the structure seems to breathe and watch in silence. Only to find empty spaces or shadows where the structure seems to breathe and watch in silence. Fog rises readily from the shore and marshes, moving unnaturally across the sand and along pathways. The mist curls and folds in ways that defy wind, forming shapes that suggest figures or movement. It obscures familiar landmarks, making the beach feel larger and more labyrinthine than it is. Visitors describe a sense of disorientation, of time and space bending, as shadows and fog shift subtly around them, amplifying every step and glance. Shadows and fog shift subtly around them, amplifying every step and glance. The soundscape of Deweese Island Beach is layered and immersive. Waves lap rhythmically along the shore, occasionally crashing with sudden intensity. Distant seabirds call faintly across marshes and dunes. Echoes of footsteps are often reported where no one walks, and the movement of sand under invisible feet leaves a subtle impression on perception. Even the gentle swish of fog against the dunes seems to carry intent, as if the environment itself participates in the unfolding experience. Shadows along the dunes and near abandoned structures seem to move independently of light and wind. They stretch and shift, sometimes pooling into shapes that suggest human presence, then dissolving into air. Observers describe a sensation of being watched, a quiet awareness that follows movement along the shore. Every glance toward the waterline, the shacks, or the dunes heightens the perception that the beach retains memory of those who have walked there before. The surf itself adds to the sense of mystery. Reflections shimmer across the water at night, creating illusions of figures walking atop waves or just beneath the surface. The combination of light, movement, and reflection creates a layered environment where perception is heightened. Where perception is heightened and ordinary reality feels suspended. Extended stays on the beach amplify awareness. Every footstep is deliberate, every sound carries weight, and every shadow becomes significant. Observers often feel nudged or guided subtly by unseen currents, whether wind, water, or presence. The lanterns, fog, and surf create a continuous play of light, shadow, and motion, producing an immersive environment that feels both ancient and alive. Time stretches and contracts, distances seem altered, and ordinary perception is continuously challenged. Even brief visits leave lasting impressions. The figures at the surf, the glow of lanterns, the shifting fog, and the sense of observation linger in memory and dreams. Visitors describe recalling the shapes of dunes, the pattern of fog, and the reflective surface of the water long after leaving. The beach etches itself into awareness, a place where history, memory, and subtle energy converge, leaving every visitor with the impression of a world that exists alongside the ordinary, yet apart from it. Deweese Island Beach endures as a remote and mysterious space, its sands, dunes, and water carrying echoes of presence and memory. Figures appear, lanterns glow, fog moves unnaturally, and the surf reflects shapes both real and imagined. To step onto its shores is to enter a realm suspended between time, perception, and history, where every step, shadow, and sound carries weight. Where every step, shadow, and sound carries weight. The island observes silently, preserving memory and energy, and leaving every visitor aware that the beach exists as a living, breathing archive of what has passed and what continues to linger in the mist and surf. And leaving every visitor aware that the beach exists as a living, breathing archive of what has passed and what continues to linger in the mist and surf. That the beach exists as a living, breathing archive of what has passed and what continues to linger in the mist and surf. Of what has passed and what continues to linger in the mist and surf. In the mist and surf. Morris Island Beach stretches along the coast, its sands blending with the remains of historic forts that have watched over the shoreline for centuries. By day, the area appears serene, the waves lapping gently against the shore and gulls calling overhead. The forts, weathered by salt, wind, and time, stand as silent monuments to battles long past. Yet as dusk falls, the atmosphere shifts. The air grows heavier, and visitors often report the sensation of being watched, as if the memories of the past have not fully faded from the landscape. Figures sometimes appear pacing the shoreline, dressed in military attire from eras long gone. They move deliberately, inspecting the sand, marching along the water's edge, or pausing to glance toward the forts. Observers describe their forms as solid and human, yet faint, as though their presence is caught between the living world and memory. When approached, the figures vanish suddenly, leaving only footprints in the sand that fade with the tide. Sounds of battle seem to echo across the beach, though no conflict exists. Visitors report hearing the sharp crack of cannon fire, the distant call of orders, and the rhythmic movements of marching troops. The noise is intermittent, sometimes close enough to startle, other times faint and carried by the wind. Observers describe the sounds as disorienting, blending seamlessly with the natural rhythm of waves and wind, creating the impression that the past is playing out over the sands. Shadows move along the walls of old buildings and forts. Dark forms shift against the weathered brick, sometimes following the contours of doorways and windows. Other times gliding across the sand and platforms. Travelers notice shapes that appear unexpectedly at the edge of vision, vanishing when looked at directly. These movements are subtle yet deliberate, giving the impression that the area itself remembers and responds to the presence of visitors. The forts and buildings themselves amplify the experience. Crumbling brick and rusted metal create pockets of shadow where forms can appear and disappear, while windows and openings allow slivers of fading light to illuminate movement in ways that heighten perception. Even the wind seems altered, carrying sound and mist in patterns that draw attention to specific areas of the beach. The forts and buildings themselves amplify the experience. Travelers often feel the chill of sudden cold spots along the sand. The air seems to tighten and press closer as if attention itself has weight. The cold is brief yet intense, following movement along the shoreline or near the forts. It adds a layer of sensory awareness to the environment, drawing attention to figures, shadows, and subtle sounds that might otherwise be overlooked. Every step becomes deliberate, and every glance carries a heightened sense of significance. Time along Morris Island beach feels altered. Moments stretch, footsteps echo longer than expected, and shadows linger in corners and along walls. The combination of sound, light, and movement creates an atmosphere where perception is heightened and memory seems to overlay the present. Observers describe feeling caught between two realities: the living world and a replay of historical presence, each step measured and resonant. Even brief visits leave a lasting impression. The figures pacing the shoreline and the shifting shadows imprint themselves on memory. Travelers recount the sensation of being observed, the air charged with unseen presence, and the sense that the past persists alongside the present. Every echo, every gust of wind, and every flicker of light adds depth to the experience, creating an environment that is immersive and enduring. Every moment is a testament to the enduring power of the past. The interplay of natural and man-made features enhances the effect, and the fort's walls provide surfaces for faint shapes to appear and vanish, blending history with the sensory experience of the present. Figures near the forts move with purpose. Some stand at attention, while others appear to patrol or inspect the structures. Observers note the fluidity of movement, the deliberate pacing, and the sudden disappearances. Footprints sometimes remain behind them, leading toward water or fort walls, only to be erased by wind or tide moments later. The experience reinforces the sense that history is layered into the landscape, preserved and replayed in subtle ways for those who witness it. Sounds of battle and presence continue in patterns that are both immersive and disorienting. The sharp report of cannon fire, the soft murmur of orders, and the rhythm of marching feet echo unpredictably. Travelers report hearing fragments of shouted commands, the clatter of armor, and distant calls, all carried across the beach and reflected off walls and sand. These echoes blend seamlessly with natural sound, reinforcing the sense that the area is alive with memory. Morris Island Beach exists as a space where past and present converge. Figures pace along the shoreline, shadows move against walls, cold spots brush against skin. And sounds of battle drift across the sand. Visitors feel observed, aware of memory in motion. And immersed in a layered experience that blends history, perception, and environment. The beach does not threaten or pursue. Yet its presence is undeniable, a quiet reminder of lives, events, and echoes that continue to inhabit the sands and forts. At night, Morris Island Beach is most alive. Figures in military attire walk the shoreline, shadows move along fort walls. Figures in military attire walk the shoreline, shadows move along fort walls, cannon fire and distant orders echo across the sand. Figures in military attire walk the shoreline, shadows move along fort walls, cannon fire and distant orders echo across the sand, whispers rise above the waves. Figures in military attire walk the shoreline, shadows move along fort walls, cannon fire and distant orders echo across the sand, whispers rise above the waves, cold spots pass along feet and legs. Figures in military attire walk the shoreline, shadows move along fort walls, cannon fire and distant orders echo across the sand, whispers rise above the waves, cold spots pass along feet and legs, lanterns flicker against crumbling walls. Figures in military attire walk the shoreline, shadows move along fort walls, cannon fire and distant orders echo across the sand, whispers rise above the waves, cold spots pass along feet and legs, lanterns flicker against crumbling walls, footprints trace patterns that vanish with tide or wind. Figures in military attire walk the shoreline, shadows move along fort walls, cannon fire and distant orders echo across the sand, whispers rise above the waves, cold spots pass along feet and legs, lanterns flicker against crumbling walls, footprints trace patterns that vanish with tide or wind, travelers leave with impressions that persist. Figures in military attire walk the shoreline, shadows move along fort walls, cannon fire and distant orders echo across the sand, whispers rise above the waves, cold spots pass along feet and legs, lanterns flicker against crumbling walls, footprints trace patterns that vanish with tide or wind, travelers leave with impressions that persist, a subtle awareness of history, presence, and memory woven into the environment. Morris Island Beach remains a place where the echoes of the past coexist with the present. Holding stories, observation, and atmosphere for those willing to witness its quiet and haunting world. Bull's Island Beach stretches for miles along the Atlantic coast, a long, quiet expanse of sand that feels isolated from the world. By day, the sun glints across the water, waves lap rhythmically against the shore, and seabirds call overhead. Yet at night, when most visitors have left, the northern stretches take on an entirely different character. Silence dominates, broken only by the whisper of wind and the gentle rolling of the surf. Figures appear among the dunes, moving with a deliberate calm. They are fleeting, visible just long enough to catch a glance before vanishing into the shadows of the sand hills. Some drift along the shoreline, others pause at the edges of tall grasses, their outlines pale and indistinct. Observers often describe the figures as purposeful, as if retracing steps or lingering in places of past significance, yet impossible to approach or engage. Whispers float along the surf, carried by the wind in patterns that seem intentional. The voices are faint and melodic at times, sharp and urgent at others, repeating names or issuing warnings that cannot be located. Travelers report a sense of being addressed, a feeling that the environment itself is aware of their presence and responsive to their movement. Cold drafts sweep across the dunes even when the night is still. The air brushes past with an unexpected chill, moving in rhythms that suggest motion nearby. Observers feel the drafts along their shoulders, necks, or arms, a subtle physical sensation that accompanies the visual and auditory phenomena. The combination of temperature change and unseen presence reinforces the impression that the beach is occupied in ways that extend beyond ordinary perception. Footsteps along the sand seem amplified at night, echoing over long distances. Each step taken by visitors feels heavier, more deliberate, as if mirrored by movement elsewhere. The layering of natural and unexplained sounds heightens awareness, making each step and glance carry significance. The dunes themselves are alive with shifting patterns. Wind sculpts the sand, creating ephemeral shapes that appear to move independently. Shadows stretch across mounds and hollows, sometimes resembling figures, other times simply twisting in ways that defy ordinary perception. Observers describe a sense of attention in the landscape, as if the dunes themselves retain memory and respond subtly to those who traverse them. Abandoned structures along the northern stretch enhance the atmosphere. Small cabins, boardwalk remnants, and old piers stand weathered and silent. Their frames weakened by decades of storms and salt air. Windows reflect moonlight or the faint shimmer of water, occasionally revealing shapes that vanish when looked at directly. Doors may shift slightly in the breeze, producing movement that seems almost deliberate, yet entirely without human intervention. Time behaves strangely along Bull's Island beach at night. Minutes feel elongated, shadows persist longer than expected, and figures can reappear in similar locations after disappearing moments before. Observers describe the experience as entering a different rhythm, where ordinary perception is suspended and the environment asserts a subtle influence over awareness. The combination of sound, light, and motion creates a layered, immersive experience that lingers long after the visitor departs. Even under moonlight, the beach carries an uncanny quality. Silvery sand reflects faint patterns, shadows stretch along dunes and structures. And the faint outlines of figures appear at the edge of vision. The rolling waves and rustle of grass amplify subtle sounds, making whispers, footsteps, and movement feel magnified. Every glance along the shoreline reinforces the sense that the environment is not inert, that it watches and responds to presence. Visitors often leave with a deep impression of atmosphere and awareness. The fleeting figures, whispered warnings, cold drafts, and shifting dunes create a narrative that is both haunting and immersive. Bull's Island Beach is not a place of overt threat, yet the cumulative effect of visual, auditory, and tactile phenomena evokes a persistent sense of mystery, memory, and presence. Bull's Island Beach endures as a landscape where environment, history, and perception converge. Figures walking through dunes, whispers along the surf, cold drafts brushing past, and shadows that twist unnaturally create an atmosphere that is immersive and unforgettable. The northern stretches of the beach remain alive with memory, observation, and subtle interaction, leaving an impression that persists long after departure. De Borda Beach stretches quietly along the coast, its sands dotted with abandoned cottages, weathered and bleached by sun and salt. The shoreline curves gently, meeting marshlands that rise behind the dunes, their reeds swaying softly in the breeze. By day, the cottages seem still and lifeless, their windows dark and doors closed against the wind. Yet as evening falls, the area transforms, revealing subtle movements and presences that are impossible to ignore. Shadows move among the abandoned cottages, drifting along walls, creeping over porches, and slipping between doorways. At first they appear as tricks of light, elongated forms shaped by the sun or moon, but careful observation reveals deliberate motion. They linger at corners, pause near windows, and glide across empty floors, vanishing when approached. Observers often feel a sense of attention, as if the beach itself remembers those who once occupied the space and continues to observe in subtle ways. Footsteps echo across the sand, along wooden decks and inside the cottages. They are measured and soft, sometimes synchronized with a visitor's own steps, other times completely independent. Laughter drifts faintly on the wind, distant and fragmented, carrying across dunes and marshes. The source is never visible, yet the sounds are distinct, layered over the natural ambient noises of waves, wind, and wildlife. Visitors report a mix of curiosity and unease, drawn toward the sounds even as instinct urges caution. Lanterns light up without source, their soft glow illuminating paths along the beach and casting shifting shadows across the cottages. The light enhances the contours of the landscape, emphasizing the shape of dunes, the texture of weathered wood, and the swaying of marsh grasses. Observers often notice the illumination highlights figures in shadow, making their movement appear deliberate and purposeful. The marshes behind the dunes are particularly active in perception. Pale figures emerge from reeds and shallow waters, standing motionless or gliding silently toward the beach. Their forms are faint and ethereal, blending with fog and moonlight, yet unmistakable. They vanish when approached directly, leaving only the impression that the marshes are alive with memory, preserving traces of presence long after human activity has ceased. The cottages themselves carry history and detail. Cracked shutters, rotted porches, and rusting hinges suggest lives that ended abruptly or faded into absence. Visitors often notice small changes, a door slightly ajar that was closed moments ago, an object subtly shifted, or a curtain moving in the breeze without wind. Each observation reinforces the sense that the environment is responsive, preserving memory and projecting presence through subtle cues. Even the natural environment contributes to awareness. The sound of waves breaking against the shore blends with the rustling of reeds and distant bird calls, producing a layered acoustic landscape. Observers become attuned to every sound, each echo reinforcing the immersive sense that the beach and cottages are alive with the energy of those who once moved through them. Paths through dunes and between cottages encourage careful attention. Shadows shift in response to movement, fog drifts along the shoreline, and reflections of moonlight create shapes that appear animate. Every step and glance draws attention to the interplay of natural and supernatural cues. Observers often feel guided by the subtle movements and sounds, a sense of rhythm that is almost intentional, as if the environment itself is communicating awareness. A sense of rhythm that is almost intentional, as if the environment itself is communicating awareness. Time feels altered on Border Beach. Moments stretch as figures glide through the marsh, lanterns flicker at irregular intervals, and footsteps echo without origin. Moments stretch as figures glide through the marsh, lanterns flicker at irregular intervals, and footsteps echo without origin. Lanterns flicker at irregular intervals, and footsteps echo without origin. Footsteps echo without origin. The perception of distance and direction shifts, blending reality and memory in a way that heightens immersion. Blending reality and memory in a way that heightens immersion. Observers report that each moment requires careful attention, reinforcing the sense that the beach preserves both the past and present simultaneously. Reinforcing the sense that the beach preserves both the past and present simultaneously. Departing the area leaves a lasting impression. The cottages, dunes, marshes, and shoreline remain vivid in memory. Along with the sounds of footsteps, laughter, and flickering lanterns. Figures in shadow and pale forms in the marshes persist in thought, creating the impression that the beach continues to watch and remember. Visitors carry the experience with them, sensing that the land holds presence even in absence. That memory endures in subtle, almost tangible ways. Ultimately, Border Beach is more than sand, dunes, and abandoned cottages. It is an environment where perception, memory, and presence converge. Ghostly figures, flickering lights, faint voices, and subtle touches create an immersive and layered experience. Each visit becomes an exploration of attention, observation, and awareness. Leaving a lasting impression of a place where the past continues to move, breathe, and engage those who walk among its dunes and marshes long after the sun has set. Fripp Island Beach stretches along the South Carolina coast, a place where sand, water, and marsh merge into an expansive landscape of natural beauty. By day, the beach is serene, with waves breaking rhythmically against the shore, dunes rising gently from the sand, and boardwalks weaving between marsh and shore. Sunlight sparkles on the water, reflecting across tidal pools and scattered shells. Gulls circle overhead, calling softly, and the wind carries the scent of salt and earth. Yet as daylight fades, the atmosphere transforms. Shadows deepen across dunes and boardwalks, fog drifts in from the water, and the landscape takes on a presence that is both subtle and compelling. Figures are sometimes glimpsed moving along the dunes or along the wooden boardwalks that stretch into the marshes. Approaching them results in nothing, leaving only the impression of motion and presence. Observers report a sense of being watched, a quiet awareness that the beach retains memory in both form and movement. These appearances are fleeting yet persistent, adding layers of depth to an environment already rich with natural detail. Visitors often experience sudden cold spots as they traverse the sand. A gust of wind may brush past from no visible source, chilling skin and drawing attention to surroundings. The effect is sporadic and unpredictable, heightening awareness and encouraging careful observation. Alongside these shifts in temperature come whispers, faint and indistinct, carried on the breeze or threading through fog. Names, fragments of conversation, and soft sighs seem to emerge from the environment itself, creating a sense that the beach holds echoes of those who once walked it. Shadowy apparitions are sometimes observed gliding across the water at night. They move with fluidity, their forms barely distinguishable from the reflections of moonlight on waves. The water itself seems to amplify their motion, reflecting shadows in ways that make them appear larger or more distant depending on perspective. The effect is both mesmerizing and unnerving, blending natural movement with the suggestion of presence. Fog plays a crucial role in shaping the beach's atmosphere. Rolling in from the ocean, it softens the edges of dunes, boardwalks, and marsh channels, creating ambiguity in perception. Lanterns, moonlight, or distant lights glimmer faintly through the mist, casting shifting reflections across sand and water. The fog carries sound, filtering and amplifying whispers, wind, and the rhythmic movement of waves. Visitors report hearing voices that seem to emerge from the haze, recalling names, conversations, or laughter from long ago. The interplay of fog, light, and sound creates an immersive environment that engages multiple senses simultaneously. The dunes themselves contribute to the sense of presence. Tall grasses sway in the wind, bending shadows and partially obscuring figures or forms in motion. Footprints in sand appear and disappear with the tide, sometimes leading to distant areas, sometimes vanishing mid-path, leaving observers to wonder whether they were made by someone present or by memory lingering in the landscape. The shapes of dunes and marsh channels create corridors and alcoves, encouraging exploration while reinforcing the sense that the beach is both expansive and intimately connected to those who traverse it. Boardwalks offer vantage points and movement pathways, connecting dunes to marsh and water. Their wooden planks creak and shift underfoot, producing sound that carries through the quiet night. Visitors note that even subtle shifts in boards echo along their length, amplifying perception of motion or presence. The combination of tactile engagement, sound, and observation heightens awareness, creating an immersive rhythm of movement and attention that shapes the experience of the beach. The soundscape of Fripp Island Beach is layered and dynamic. Waves crash against the shore, gulls call in the distance. And wind threads through grasses and marshes. Within this natural hum, whispers, footsteps, and faint movements emerge. Sometimes aligning with perceived figures or appearing independently. Silence is never complete, as the environment carries traces of activity both past and present. Each auditory cue encourages observation, turning ordinary walking along sand or boardwalk into a careful, immersive experience. Time seems altered after dark. Minutes stretch as visitors pause to observe shadows, listen to whispers, or follow faint lights. Hours may pass without notice, as the environment imposes its own rhythm through waves, wind, and fog. Each moment becomes an engagement with perception, memory, and the subtle presence embedded in the landscape. Observers report that repeated visits heighten sensitivity to shifts in light, sound, and movement, creating a layered understanding of the beach as both natural and inhabited by echoes of past life. Memory of Fripp Island Beach persists long after leaving. The glimpsed figures. Shifting shadows. Ghostly lights. Whispers. And cold spots remain vivid in recollection. The beach leaves an enduring mark, a space where beauty and haunting coexist, where sand, water, and marsh are intertwined with memory, presence, and the subtle persistence of those who came before. An enduring mark, a space where sand, water, and marsh are intertwined with memory, presence, and the subtle persistence of those who came. Fripp Island Beach endures as both sanctuary and repository of experience. Dunes, marshes, boardwalks, and tidal waters interact with light, shadow, and perception. Figures, whispers, and ghostly lights converge to form an intricate narrative, engaging visitors in observation, attention, and reflection. The beach invites exploration, mindfulness, and imagination, leaving a lasting impression of a space alive with memory, energy, and the quiet persistence of the unseen along the shore. A space alive with memory, energy, and the quiet persistence of the unseen along the shore. Edisto Lighthouse Beach stretches along the coast, its sands wide and windswept, bordered by dunes and marshes that shift with tide and wind. The lighthouse stands tall on the cliffs, weathered by salt and storms, its light long extinguished yet still casting a presence over the surrounding landscape. Rocks jut from the surf below, catching foamy waves as they crash endlessly, and the air carries the briny scent of the ocean, mingled with the faint tang of decaying marsh grass. Even in daylight, the area feels suspended, as if caught between the past and present. Visitors often report seeing figures near the cliffs and in the surf. They appear fleeting, blurred by distance and spray, yet distinctly human in shape. Some stand silently, gazing across the water, while others move slowly along the shoreline, disappearing beneath waves or into the shadows of the dunes. Others move slowly along the shoreline, disappearing beneath waves or into the shadows of the dunes. Approaching them often reveals nothing tangible, leaving only a lingering impression of presence and the sense that the beach itself is alive with memory. The lighthouse, though decommissioned, is said to ring its bell unexpectedly. The sound is deep and resonant, echoing across the sands and marshes. It startles those who hear it, carrying the weight of maritime history, as if calling to sailors long gone. Its sound blends with the crash of waves and the sigh of wind, creating a layered auditory environment that heightens awareness and evokes the past. Abandoned cottages dot the dunes and edges of the marshes. Windows are broken or clouded with age. And shadows are often glimpsed within. Fleeting forms that shift with light and perspective. The shapes inside the cottages suggest movement without origin. Figures paused in domestic gestures long forgotten. Observers report a subtle feeling of being watched. A quiet awareness that persists as they move along the paths and sand surrounding the structures. Whispers drift across the beach, carried by the wind through dunes and marshes. They are soft and indistinct, rising and falling unpredictably. Visitors often hear their names spoken in voices unfamiliar yet oddly intimate. The sound seems to move with them, drifting from one location to another, impossible to pinpoint. The whispers are not threatening, yet they create a sense of attention, a persistent awareness that the landscape itself is conscious of those who traverse it. The dunes themselves seem alive with motion. Shadows shift along the ridges and hollows, stretching with the changing light of day or moon. Shapes appear at the edges of vision, lingering for moments before dissolving into the sand or mist. Travelers describe the dunes as both beautiful and unsettling, their contours suggesting hidden pathways and spaces that extend beyond ordinary perception. Every step across the sand seems deliberate, as if measured by unseen forces guiding movement. The surf contributes to the immersive atmosphere. Waves crash against rocks and shore, their rhythm both calming and unnerving. Reflections of the lighthouse and cliffs shimmer across the water, creating forms that appear to move independently of the tide. Occasionally, shapes resembling figures emerge from the foam, only to vanish moments later, leaving a lingering sense of observation. The interplay of water, light, and shadow produces an environment that is both captivating and haunting. Visitors often experience heightened sensitivity on Edisto Lighthouse Beach. Every creak of driftwood, rustle of marsh grass, and shift in wind seems amplified. Shadows that would normally go unnoticed gain definition, and sounds from distant parts of the beach carry with clarity. The figures on cliffs or in surf, the glowing windows of cottages, and the intermittent bell of the lighthouse combine to create a fully immersive environment, where perception is sharpened and ordinary boundaries of space and time feel suspended. Even brief visits leave lasting impressions. The ghostly figures, the ringing bell, the shifting shadows, and the whispers in wind and marsh imprint themselves in memory. Dreams often replay the landscape, figures, and sounds, reinforcing the sense that the beach is inhabited, not only by nature but by echoes of history and subtle presences that persist. Observers leave with a quiet awareness that the beach remembers and responds, a connection to a place suspended between past and present. Observers leave with a lasting impression that the beach remembers and responds, a connection to a place suspended between past and present. That the beach remembers and responds, a quiet awareness that the beach remembers and responds, a connection to a place suspended between past and present, and subtle presences that persist. That the beach holds secrets and memories. That the beach remembers and responds, a connection to a place suspended between past and present. Observers leave with a lasting impression. Edisto Lighthouse Beach endures as a space of mystery and memory. Its sands, dunes, cliffs, and marshes carry echoes of lives long past. Figures appear, shadows shift, lanterns glow in abandoned cottages, and the bell tolls without cause. To walk its shoreline is to enter a place where perception is heightened. History is alive, and subtle energy persists in every wave, shadow, and gust of wind. The beach exists as both landscape and memory, leaving every visitor aware of the lingering presence that watches, remembers, and continues to inhabit Edisto Lighthouse Beach. Deweese Village Beach stretches quietly along the coastline, its sand pale and smooth, the waves moving rhythmically against the shore. Fog often curls across the beach, thickening as evening falls, carrying faint laughter that seems to come from nowhere. The sound drifts over the dunes and along abandoned boardwalks, soft and playful yet distant, lingering in the air like a memory caught between past and present. Travelers stepping onto the sand feel an immediate shift in atmosphere, a weight that presses lightly against their senses, hinting at unseen presence. Figures sometimes appear along the boardwalks, dressed in early 20th century clothing. They move deliberately, pacing back and forth, their silhouettes partially obscured by fog. Observers describe the forms as human yet faint, almost as if caught between worlds. Their movements are subtle, measured, and when approached, the figures vanish without a trace, leaving only empty wood and the soft hiss of waves on the shore. The moments are brief but vivid, imprinting a sense of life lingering in a place otherwise abandoned. Visitors often report the sensation of invisible hands brushing against them. The feeling is never aggressive, but insistent, drawing attention to subtle changes in surroundings or movement. Each step becomes deliberate, each glance carries weight, and every pause amplifies awareness of the space. The sensation contributes to the overall impression that the beach itself is alive with memory. Ghostly faces sometimes appear in the water. Observers describe pale, human features rising momentarily among the surf, reflecting moonlight before vanishing the instant they are noticed. The phenomenon is fleeting yet unforgettable, creating the impression that the ocean holds fragments of the past within its motion. Waves carry both sound and movement, blending natural rhythm with fleeting glimpses of forms that exist only for a moment. The abandoned boardwalks add to the atmosphere. Weathered planks stretch along the dunes, railings splintered and creaking under the lightest step. Shadows gather between posts and under arches, shifting with the movement of fog and moonlight. Every sound of footsteps, the hiss of wind, the gentle lap of water resonates in the structure, creating patterns that amplify perception. Observers notice forms in corners and gaps where movement appears and vanishes, enhancing the sense of a space alive with history. Fog shifts unpredictably across the sand and boardwalks. It moves in curls and eddies, creating pockets of obscured vision and softening sound. Paths that were clear moments before become hidden, dunes blending with shadowed outlines. Travelers note that visibility changes suddenly, making familiar features appear unfamiliar. The fog itself seems to guide perception, emphasizing shapes and figures while heightening the impression of presence in the environment. Whispers mingle with the laughter carried by fog. They drift across the sand and along the boardwalks. Faint phrases and fragmented sentences repeated in no discernible order. Words seem carried from a distance yet linger close, suggesting life once lived in the cottages and along the beach. Observers describe the effect as immersive. A blend of sound and memory that creates the impression of history unfolding before their senses. Time feels altered along Deweese Village Beach at night. Minutes stretch, footsteps echo longer than expected, and shadows linger in corners and along planks. Figures appear and vanish in rhythm with the movement of fog, faces emerge and disappear among the surf, and laughter drifts unpredictably across the sand. Visitors report heightened awareness, noticing subtle shifts in light, shadow, and sound that would otherwise go unnoticed, deepening the sensation that the beach exists simultaneously in past and present. Even brief encounters leave lasting impressions. The figures pacing the boardwalks, the ghostly faces in the surf, the tug of invisible hands, and the drifting whispers imprint themselves on memory. Travelers describe a quiet tension that follows them, a sense that unseen presence remains even after leaving the shore. Every echo of movement, every flicker of light, and every ripple of water contributes to the immersive experience, leaving a subtle yet persistent awareness of the past. The natural environment enhances the effect. While tide pools reflect light from moon and stars, waves crash rhythmically, masking footsteps and whispers, blending natural and spectral perception. Boardwalks and cottages, weathered by time, provide surfaces where shadows and forms appear and vanish, reinforcing the sense that the landscape itself preserves memory. Deweese Village Beach exists as a space where memory, perception, and environment converge. Figures appear along boardwalks, faces emerge in the surf. Whispers drift across the sand. And invisible hands guide or tug at visitors. Travelers leave with impressions that linger, a heightened awareness of shadow and presence. And a quiet understanding that the past continues to inhabit this coastal landscape. At night, Deweese Village Beach is most alive. Fog curls across sand and boardwalks. Figures pace silently, laughter and whispers drift over waves. And ghostly faces rise briefly in the surf. Invisible hands brush against skin. Shadows stretch along dunes and timber. And every step is accompanied by subtle sensation and observation. Visitors depart with memories that endure. A quiet resonance of past lives, spectral presence, and the lingering stories embedded in the sand, surf, and fog of Deweese Village Beach. Kiowa Marsh Beach stretches along the coastline, a quiet and isolated area where the sand meets dense marshlands. By day, the sun glints off the water and the waves lap gently against the shore. Yet as evening falls, the landscape transforms. The marshes take on a deeper, more shadowed character. And the beach feels suspended between the natural world and something unseen. Figures are sometimes seen standing at the edge of the marsh, silent and motionless. Their presence is subtle, yet unmistakable, as if they are observing everything along the shoreline. They appear briefly, only long enough to catch a glance before blending with the shadows of grasses and reeds. Observers report a sensation of being watched, a quiet awareness that lingers long after the figures vanish. Visitors often hear soft music drifting from the dunes. The sound is faint and melodic, carried along by the wind. As if originating from abandoned cottages or hidden spaces. Alongside the music, whispers float, fragments of voices calling across the sand and marsh. The sounds are indistinct yet persistent, drawing attention to areas where no living presence can be found. The combination of music and whispers creates an immersive and haunting atmosphere. Lanterns glow along the facades of abandoned cottages that dot the northern stretches of the beach. The light appears without source, illuminating porches and windows with a soft, flickering warmth. Observers describe the effect as both comforting and unsettling, providing visibility while simultaneously emphasizing the emptiness of the structures. Shadows stretch and twist in the lantern glow, appearing to move independently, heightening the sense of mystery. The sand itself seems alive underfoot at times. Visitors describe subtle shifting or sinking in areas where the surface should be stable, as if the ground responds to presence. As if the ground responds to presence. This subtle movement, combined with sound and light, reinforces the perception of the beach as an environment that holds memory and presence. The marshlands amplify every sound. The wind carries whispers across the water. And the gentle rustle of reeds is magnified in the stillness. Distant waves. The faint crack of driftwood. And the soft hum of unseen wildlife blend with the auditory phenomena. To create a layered, immersive experience. Ordinary sounds take on unusual resonance. Producing a heightened awareness of the environment. And a sense of subtle interaction with it. Abandoned cottages and scattered structures contribute to the atmosphere. Rooflines sag, windows are broken or boarded. Walls are weathered by years of sun, salt, and storms. Despite decay, the interiors sometimes appear intact. Shadows moving along walls or across floors as if recalling prior activity. The flickering lanterns reveal shapes that vanish when approached. And the sense of observation remains, persistent and compelling. Time seems altered on Kiowa Marsh Beach at night. Moments stretch, shadows linger longer than expected, and patterns of light and movement repeat in subtle ways. Figures reappear at dunes or near cottages, soft music flows through the air in waves, and whispers echo along familiar paths. Visitors often report that the usual perception of distance and scale shifts, producing an immersive sensation where past and present converge. Even under moonlight, the beach carries an otherworldly quality. The marsh reflects faint silvery patterns, shadows stretch across sand and water. And figures at the edges of vision become more distinct. The interplay of light, shadow, and motion creates a perception of the environment as attentive, alive, and responsive to those who traverse it. Observers often describe an enhanced awareness of every step, every sound, and every movement. Footsteps echo along the boardwalks and sand trails, sometimes accompanied by the faint rustle of reeds. The auditory effects blend with the natural rhythm of the surf and the occasional gust of wind, producing a sensation of movement beyond the observable. Visitors report that each step seems mirrored or followed, reinforcing the impression that the beach itself is alive, observing, and attentive to presence. Visitors often leave Kiowa Marsh Beach with a lasting sense of atmosphere and memory. The figures in the marsh. The soft music and whispers from the dunes. Lanterns glowing without source. And shifting sand all combine. The beach is not threatening. Yet it carries an undeniable sense of life and memory. A quiet persistence that lingers in the mind long after departure. Kiowa Marsh Beach endures as a place where environment, history, and perception converge. Figures along the marsh, music and whispers, lantern light, and subtly moving sand create an atmosphere that is immersive, mysterious, and unforgettable. Visitors experience not only the beauty of the natural landscape but also the presence of history, memory, and unseen observers, leaving an impression that continues long after the tide has receded. Cape Romaine Beach stretches along the coast, its sands wide and windswept, meeting the surf in a steady rhythm that carries the scent of salt and seaweed. By day, the beach appears serene, dunes rising gently along the shoreline and marshes reaching inland, forming a natural barrier that isolates the area. Yet as dusk falls, the landscape begins to shift, revealing subtle signs of presence and movement that are otherwise unnoticed, hints of memory and attention embedded in the sand and waves. Figures are seen along the dunes, standing motionless or gliding slowly across the ridges of sand. Others appear within the surf, their forms outlined against the breaking waves, moving with a fluidity that is both natural and impossible. Observers report that these shapes vanish when approached, leaving only the impression of motion in spaces that seem empty. Each appearance feels deliberate, drawing attention to the interplay between light, shadow, and memory along the shoreline. The cries of the beach are carried by wind and water. Distant voices, fragmented and echoing across the waves, call out in tones that are sharp, brief, and impossible to locate. They sometimes resemble human calls, other times a mixture of laughter and distress, blending with the natural ambient sounds of the surf and gulls. The effect is immersive, creating tension and curiosity, compelling observers to scan the landscape and notice subtle movements in dunes, water, and marshes alike. The fog along Cape Romaine Beach adds a further dimension to perception. Fog rises from marshes and shallow pools, drifting over sand and surf, curling and twisting in irregular patterns. Visitors often report that the fog seems to move unnaturally, as though guided by unseen forces, thickening in certain areas and retreating in others. The effect is disorienting, amplifying the sense of depth and mystery, and giving the impression that the environment itself is aware of those who traverse it. Footsteps appear along the sand without source, sometimes soft and measured, sometimes urgent and fleeting. The rhythm of waves and echoes interweaves with these phantom movements, producing a continuous sensory dialogue with the environment. Observers describe a heightened awareness of each step, every shift in position, as the beach engages attention through sound as well as sight. The phantom movements produce a sense of unease and foreboding, as if something is lurking just beyond sight. Light interacts with the dunes, fog, and surf in ways that alter perception. Moonlight glimmers off wet sand and water, casting reflections that appear animate. Shadows stretch along the dunes, bending with the subtle undulations of the beach. Ghostly figures appear within these patterns, blending with natural elements yet distinct enough to suggest human form. Observers feel drawn to these shapes, compelled to follow or observe while noting that focus often makes the figures vanish, leaving only their absence behind. The marshes and tidal flats surrounding the beach add further texture to the scene. Shallow pools reflect the sky and moonlight, forming mirrors that distort shapes and movement. Figures sometimes emerge along these edges, moving slowly before disappearing into reeds or mist. Observers report subtle changes in air and temperature near these areas, a cooling breeze or shift in moisture that reinforces the impression of presence. Each observation builds on the next, layering perception, memory, and the environment into a cohesive experience. Time seems altered along the haunted sands. Moments stretch or compress unpredictably. The movement of fog and surf creating a sense of suspended reality. Observers report that shadows shift differently than expected. Figures appear and vanish at irregular intervals. And sounds echo in patterns that defy ordinary expectation. The combination of light, shadow, sound, and perception creates an immersive experience, where attention and awareness are fully engaged. Departing Cape Romaine Beach often leaves a lasting impression. Figures fade into fog, footsteps vanish along the surf, and distant cries recede with the wind. Yet memory preserves their presence, and observers carry a vivid sense of the beach's layered history and ongoing awareness. The dunes, marshes, surf, and fog all remain perceptible in recollection. A testament to the subtle interplay of perception and memory that defines the haunted environment. Ultimately, Cape Romaine Beach is more than sand, surf, and marsh. It is a space where memory, perception, and presence converge, creating a living narrative through ghostly figures, cries, footsteps, and moving fog. Every visit becomes an exploration of attention and awareness, a journey across dunes and surf where the past continues to move, linger, and engage those who walk its haunted sands. The beach endures as a place of observation and memory, leaving a lasting impression on all who experience it. Thank you for walking along the haunted beaches of South Carolina with me tonight. The sands may seem peaceful by day, but at night, the coastline carries memories, sorrow, and restless spirits. Some visitors leave terrified, some haunted, and some never return. If you ever find yourself wandering along these beaches after dark, remember these tales. Step carefully, listen closely, and ask yourself, would you dare to walk where the past refuses to rest, or would you leave while you still can? Rest well, my friend, until our next haunted journey.